everyone, and welcome back. Today, we're taking a deep dive into something that I think a lot of you were really curious about, and honestly, me too, and that's this whole connection between autism and doom scrolling.
Yeah, absolutely. It's something that I think a lot of people are talking about, and it's something that we definitely need to kind of unpack a little bit here. We all kind of know what doom scrolling is, but this goes a lot deeper than that.
Right, exactly. And you shared this article with me, Understanding Autism and Doom Scrolling, Navigating the Digital Landscape. What a title. But before we get too far into it, maybe we should start with just a quick definition of doom scrolling, just so we're all starting from the same place.
For sure. Basically, it's that thing where you're just kind of glued to your phone or your computer screen, just endlessly scrolling through all the bad news, the negativity on social media, even when, deep down, it's making you feel kind of anxious. I mean, we've all been there, right? But the thing is, for people with autism, it can be a whole other thing.
Yeah, and I think that's where this idea of sensory sensitivity comes in, which is something that the article really dove into. And I have to admit, that's not something I'd really, I don't know, fully considered before in this context.
Yeah, and it's so important. Sensory sensitivity is really common in autism. And what it means is that things like sights, sounds, emotions, even like the blue light from a screen, it can all feel a lot more intense than it does for people who aren't neurodivergent.
Wow. Okay. So if you're already sensitive to all that sensory input, and then you're constantly bombarded by all this negativity online, it's almost like, I don't know, it's like turning up the volume on an already loud and stressful experience, isn't it?
Exactly, exactly. And the thing is, it's not just some theory. The article actually talked about this study, and they found that 77%, that's more than three-quarters of autistic people, said that they often feel overwhelmed by sensory input. Just think about that for a second.
That's huge.
It is. You know how overwhelming it can be when you're, say, in a really busy supermarket with all the lights and the sounds and everything going on? Imagine if just scrolling on your phone felt that intense.
Yeah, that suddenly makes doom scrolling feel like a much bigger deal than just a bad habit. Like,
That,
potentially damaging in a way I hadn't considered. And actually, speaking of things I hadn't considered, the article also had some pretty shocking stats about how much time, kids with autism are actually spending on screens these
oh,
days.
yeah, that's a big one. There's this study from the CDC, I think it was mentioned in the article, and they found that kids with autism are spending something like 4 to 6 hours every single day on screens. Now, obviously, that doesn't mean they're doom scrolling the whole time, but that's still a ton of screen time.
Right. And it makes you wonder what exactly they're seeing during all that time.
Yeah, and a lot of it probably is coming from social media,
Mm-hmm.
which, let's face it, isn't exactly known for being the most uplifting place.
Mm-hmm.
I know, even for me, I get most of my news from Twitter these days, and I'm not even on the spectrum.
Exactly. It's wild. And that made me think about another point from the article. It highlighted how a lot of autistic individuals actually rely on social media as their main source of news. Like they're not just scrolling for fun, they're getting their information from there.
Right, and that's where things get even more complex. The article mentioned that 55% of autistic people actually said that social media was their primary news source. That's huge. And then when you think about the fact that 40% of autistic individuals reported increased anxiety directly because of news they were consuming during the pandemic,
Yeah.
you start to see how these things all connect.
Yeah. It's a lot. It's not just anecdotal. It's real data. These are real struggles that people are dealing with. But I'm glad the article didn't just leave us feeling hopeless. There was some good advice in there, some actual practical stuff. So where do we go from here? What can we actually do to navigate all of this in a healthier way?
That's the big question, isn't it? And thankfully, the article did give us some pretty good answers. It's all about becoming more mindful about how we interact with all this tech and coming up with some simple strategies that we can use in our everyday lives.
Okay, I like the sound of that. So what's the first step? What do we need to do?
This one might seem obvious, but honestly, it's probably the hardest one. Setting time limits. We're all guilty of it. Spending way too much time scrolling, getting sucked in, but there are actually tools and apps and things out there that can help us break free from that cycle.
Time limit apps. I've heard about those, but to be honest, I've never really, I don't know, I've always been a little hesitant to try them. Can they really make a difference? I'm curious about your take. Time limit apps.
Uh-huh.
I've heard about those, but to be honest, I've never really, I don't know, I've always been a little hesitant to try them. Can they really make a difference? I'm curious about your take.
Oh, absolutely. It can. It's kind of amazing. They really work. It's all about like setting boundaries, right, with
Yeah.
yourself and with your technology, which I know could be tough. But imagine, like, you literally say to your phone, okay, social media, you get 30 minutes today, and then that's it. App blocks you out. No more scrolling. You don't even need willpower.
See, that's what I need. Something to just like take the decision out of my hands. And it's funny because it's like that point the article made about how we need to like break free from the scroll. But then we can use technology to help us break free from technology, which I kind of love. Okay, so time limits. Check. What else? What's the next step in our digital detox journey here?
Okay, so once you've, set some boundaries, then it becomes about being more intentional about what we're actually letting into our digital space. It's about curating our feeds, right? So instead of just letting that algorithm decide what we see, which, let's be honest, is often more negativity, just to keep us scrolling, right?
Okay.
We can actually make the choice to seek out things that are positive, things that are informative. There's so much good stuff out there, but we have to go looking for it.
It's like digital spring cleaning. I love that. Out with the doom and gloom and in with the stuff that actually makes us feel good, or teaches us something new. I'm all about that. But okay, what about those moments when like you're already feeling overwhelmed, like you're mid-scroll and that anxiety starts to set in? Any advice for those moments? Because honestly, I think that's when I need the most help.
Oh, for sure. And the article had some good advice for that, too. It talked to the power of mindfulness. Even in those moments when you're feeling really sucked in, just simple things like, taking a few deep breaths. It can really help to manage those feelings.
See, that's so smart, and yet I never think to actually do it. So it's like if you feel that tightness in your chest, you literally just pause, take a few deep breaths, kind of recenter yourself, and then you can decide if you want to keep scrolling or if it's time to put the phone down.
Right, exactly. Exactly. It's like hitting the pause button on all that doom. And sometimes, that pause, that's all you need to realize that actually you'd much rather be doing something else entirely.
Right. It's about taking back control, even if it's just for like 2 minutes. I'm definitely going to try that next time. Okay, so we've got time limits, we've got curating our feeds, mindful breathing. It's like we're putting together a toolkit here for a calmer, happier digital life. Love it. What else can we add to this toolkit?
Well, the last thing the article talked about might be the most important one, and that's logging off. Like actually logging off and going out and doing something in the real world. It sounds so simple, but it's crucial, especially for people who are really sensitive to sensory overload. Think like hobbies, spending time in nature, reading an actual book, anything that brings you joy and helps you, recharge, but without that constant buzz of a screen.
It's like that classic advice of like, if you're stressed, go for a walk, but like for the digital age.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Sometimes the best thing we can do is just disconnect. Step away from the digital and reconnect with the real world and with ourselves.
Find that balance. I love that. Remembering that the internet is great and all, but it's not the only thing. Easier said than done, though, right? Like, how do we actually put that into practice? It's easy to say log off, but then dot what?
You're right. It's definitely a challenge. One thing that helps me, I think, is actually making plans. So instead of just saying like, oh, I should spend more time in nature, I'll actually like schedule a hike with a friend or plan a camping trip for the weekend. Having something concrete on the calendar, for some reason, it makes it a lot harder to just ignore and keep scrolling.
That makes so much sense. It's like having that accountability, even if it's just to yourself, and doesn't have to be something big either. Even just like committing to reading a book for 30 minutes before bed instead of scrolling on my phone.
Right.
Baby steps, right?
Exactly. It's all about those little things, those small changes that we can actually stick with. Because ultimately, it's about shifting our mindset, right? From seeing offline time as this thing we should do to something we actually want to do because it makes us feel good.
That's such a good point. It's not about adding more to our to-do list. It's about like actually wanting to do these things. And I love that connection you made to shifting our mindset. That's huge.
Yeah, absolutely. And honestly, I think that's a message that goes beyond just this specific issue. It's like we all deserve to have a healthy relationship with technology, right? No matter who we are, whether we're on the spectrum or not. It's about making sure that technology enhances our lives, not, takes away from them.
100%. So I guess if we're trying to like sum up this whole deep dive, I think it's safe to say that doom scrolling, especially for those with autism, is a real thing. It has real consequences, but it doesn't have to rule our lives, right?
Right. And I think the biggest takeaway for me is that the more we understand the unique challenges, the sensitivity, the way people with autism often rely on social media for information, the more we understand that, the better equipped we are to approach this whole issue with like Empathy and awareness.
And, on a more practical level, we've got all these tools in our toolkit now. We can set those time limits. We can curate our feeds. We can remember to take those deep breaths when we're feeling overwhelmed. And maybe most importantly, just log off every now and then, right? Live a little.
Exactly. Small steps, big changes. It can make a difference.
It really can. And it makes you think, like, even beyond all the stuff we've talked about today, the personal stuff, what about, like, the bigger picture? The article focused a lot on what individuals can do, but I'm wondering, could we be thinking even bigger? Like, what about the way these online spaces are actually designed? Could we be doing more to make the internet itself less overwhelming, less anxiety-inducing for everyone?
Yeah, that is a question.
Mhm.
It's a big one for sure. But I love it. It's worth thinking about. Imagine like a digital world that was actually designed with well-being in mind, where like connection and information were prioritized, not just endless scrolling and negativity. Now that's a future I think we can all get behind.
I know, right? Something to strive for. Well, on that note, thank you so much for taking this deep dive with me. This has been amazing. Until next time.